Hey guys, welcome to Study IQ. I am Prashant Dhawan and in this video we are going to talk about the Quad. The Quad is basically a fancy name given to the quadrilateral group that consists of India, US, Japan and Australia. Now in this video we will find out why these respective countries are coming together to form a group, what are their objectives, what are the points that they agree on, what are the points that they disagree on. So a lot to be discussed in this video. Let's start. Study IQ's pendrive and tablet courses are available for various exams like SSC exam, CGL, CHSL. Both the exams course will be covered extensively. Bank exams, UPSC exams, and we even have courses for DSSB, CLAT. So all these courses are available on studyiq.com. And if you go there, you will also find a chat option that will help you in your purchase. And you can also call these numbers that you see on the screen. Now, as most of you probably know, the recent ASEAN Summit, the 31st ASEAN Summit 2017 summit was held in Manila, Philippines. Now, on the sidelines of that summit, a lot of other meetings took place, but among those meetings, a very important meeting took place that could shape the geopolitics of the entire Asia Pacific region for the coming years. This meeting was a quadrilateral dialogue between India, Japan, Australia, and US. Now, before we talk about what issues were raised in this quadrilateral dialogue and what is its importance, let me tell you who attended this dialogue from the Indian side. Now, first of all, let me tell you about the hierarchy of our Foreign Affairs Ministry. Now, you probably know that every ministry has a minister, right? So, the Minister of Foreign Affairs is Sushma Swaraj ji. And under Sushma Swaraj ji, there is the Foreign Affairs Secretary who is S. Jaishankar. You must remember his name. He's a very important man. Mr. S. Jaishankar, India's Foreign Affairs Secretary. Now, under the Foreign Affairs Secretary, we have an additional secretary. There can be a couple of additional secretaries as well. Depends on the ministry. And under the additional secretary, we have a lot of joint secretaries. One ministry can have 50 or 40 joint secretaries. I think the Foreign Affairs Ministry has more than 50 joint secretaries. So, out of those 50 joint secretaries, 2 joint secretaries attended this quadrilateral dialogue from the Indian side. And from the other countries as well, officials of the rank of joint secretary or perhaps the additional secretary in their respective countries, they attended this quadrilateral dialogue. Now, since only joint secretaries from various countries they attended this dialogue, don't underestimate the importance of the quadrilateral dialogue. The reason why the secretary of Indian Foreign Affairs Ministry or perhaps even the minister herself didn't visit or didn't attend this quadrilateral dialogue is because this quadrilateral dialogue is being revived after 10 years. That's right, this isn't the first time we are seeing all these 4 countries coming together to form a quadrilateral dialogue. Such an initiative was taken in 2007, but due to an unfortunate reason, the quadrilateral dialogue fell apart, and because of that, China gained a lot of ground in Asia. So, before talking about the aspects of this quadrilateral dialogue, let's talk about the background. Let's go back 10 years and understand why this quadrilateral dialogue fell apart in 2007. I'm a big fan of Shinzo Abe, and I think he's a visionary leader. And in 2007, when he was the Prime Minister of Japan, that's right, he was the Prime Minister of Japan in 2007 as well. At that time, he was in his first term. At that time, he understood the importance of a quadrilateral group that consists of 4 large democracies: Australia, India, US, and Japan. Now, perhaps he saw that in the coming years, after a decade, China would emerge as a powerful economic powerhouse that would run amok in the entire Indo-Pacific region and would not listen to any other international organization or perhaps even the rest of the world when it came to South China Sea. He understood that in order to counter China's assertive moves in South China Sea and even the rest of the region, a quadrilateral group must come together so that they can maintain the status quo. I do not think that he wanted to be assertive towards China. I think the intention was to maintain the status quo. So Japan called for a quadrilateral group with all these 4 countries participating in it, and all the 4 countries agreed. At that time, Australia's Prime Minister was John Howard, US was under the Bush administration. India's Prime Minister was Manmohan Singh ji, and of course Japan was headed by the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. So all these countries came together, and the first thing that they did was they conducted a joint naval exercise near Okinawa Island. Now, Okinawa Island is a Japanese island, and it is relatively closer to China than the rest of the Japanese islands. And at that time, it was considered a huge geopolitical move to conduct a large scale military exercise, a large scale naval exercise near the Okinawa Island that was very close to the Chinese coastline. And obviously, China took objection to this. China objected to this naval exercise, and the country that it chose to target to break this group was Australia. You see, at around 2007, Australia was producing a lot of coal and it needed a buyer. And China was a huge consumer of coal, and it readily bought Australian coal for its manufacturing boom that happened during the 2000 and 2015 period. So around 2007, when Australia was under the prime ministership of John Howard, Australia pretty much resisted the Chinese pressure to withdraw from the quadrilateral group, even though China had threatened Australia that it would stop purchasing coal from it. But as soon as elections were held in Australia and John Howard was replaced by a new prime minister whose name was Kevin Rudd, Australia's foreign policy changed. You see, Kevin Rudd was of the opinion that the quadrilateral group is not all that important for Australia, and China's consumer market is of much greater importance to Australia. And Kevin Rudd decided that Australia should pull out of this quadrilateral group, and it was seen as a huge diplomatic victory of China, as China had tried to pressurize Australia into getting out of this group so that this group would weaken, and it happened. And this also jolted India's confidence, because India suddenly realized that these countries aren't serious about forming a group to maintain the status quo in the Indo-Pacific region. They are pretty much in it for some short-term gains. So in 2008, India too withdrew from this group when Manmohan Singh ji went to China. At that time, China was headed by Hu Jintao, who was the president of China. Manmohan Singh ji made a speech in China, and he said that India does not want to be any part of a quadrilateral group, and it certainly has no ambitions to contain China. So this is how the quadrilateral group was formed, and it broke down within a year because of Chinese diplomacy and perhaps Australia's undecisive attitude. Now let's move back to 2017, when this quadrilateral group is being resurrected once again by Japan, led by Shinzo Abe. Now, since Australia's withdrawal from the quadrilateral dialogue, also from the Malabar naval exercise that was supposed to happen in 2008 with all the four countries, India was very reluctant to take Australia back in the Malabar naval exercise, and it was also seen as a sign of India's reluctance to form the quadrilateral dialogue once again. And this reluctance lasted for 5 or 6 years until recently in 2017, when it seems that India has built enough trust in Australia once again that this time around the Australians will not pull out of the quadrilateral dialogue, and India too has approved to have a quadrilateral dialogue with the rest of the three countries. Now, this time around, this dialogue has two aspects. Alright, now first is the economic aspect, and the second is the defense aspect. Now, let me make one thing clear. Never in the history of this quadrilateral dialogue was any mention of China made during any official meeting or any official dialogue. Alright, it's just a speculation of the analysts and the geopolitics enthusiasts who observed that perhaps these four countries, these four democracies, are coming together in Indo-Pacific region simply to counter China's growing clout. Alright, so don't ever write in any essay or a paper that this quadrilateral dialogue was created to counter China. Alright, the main objective of this quadrilateral dialogue is to maintain the status quo and stability in the entire region so that trade can happen easily without any fear of a certain country. Now, let's talk about the two aspects of this quadrilateral dialogue that has been resurrected in 2017. The economic aspect. The four countries believe that a lot of developing countries in Asia, small developing countries like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and a lot of other countries, they are being trapped in a debt trap. And of course, the reference is to the OROB initiative by China. Now, under the One Belt, One Road initiative, China is pretty much giving loans to countries that simply do not have the capacity to pay back the interest of the loan, let alone even the capital. A classic example of this is the Hambantota investment of China in Sri Lanka. Now, in Sri Lanka, there is a region called Hambantota where China invested a lot of money, and basically China lended Sri Lanka a lot of funds, billions of dollars, to construct a huge airport, also the Hambantota port and other highways, and they expected a lot of cargoes to dock in this Hambantota port, and eventually this port would become so profitable that Sri Lanka would pay back the Chinese interest, and then they would also have their assets built in Sri Lanka. But apparently this did not happen. The port just did not take off, the profits were not there, and it turned into a financial disaster. Now, China, being the good country that it is, quote unquote good, it gave Sri Lanka the option of leasing the Hambantota port to the Chinese government for a period of 99 years. And Sri Lanka reluctantly had to agree because it simply had no other option left, because it just could not pay back the debt that it owed to China. Now, similar cases could also be seen in perhaps Pakistan, where China has lended them a lot of funds for the Gwadar port and the China-Pakistan economic corridor. Now, suppose if the Gwadar port fails to take off due to whatever reason, then Pakistan too will be trapped in the debt trap, and perhaps they will have to lease out the Gwadar port or some other important asset of their country. Now, this is where the quadrilateral group comes in, where these four countries believe that they should form a some sort of a financial institution that would lend funds to these small countries, and of course the funds would be lent to them in such a way that they would not be trapped in some sort of a debt trap, and they would eventually pay back the loans. Now, how they will do that, where will the funds come from, that has not been discussed so far. Only the joint secretaries have met. This is only the resurrection of the quadrilateral dialogue. I think a lot of progress is to be made in the economic aspect of this dialogue. Now, if we talk about the defense aspect, then surely we will see Australia participating in the Malabar naval exercise in the coming years, as this quadrilateral dialogue has finally formed, and we might also see exercises being conducted in the Okinawa island, near the Okinawa island, like they were conducted in 2007, and perhaps we might even see more countries being participants of the Malabar exercise. But of course, it will take a lot of time before Australia becomes a permanent member of the Malabar naval exercise. Right now, there are only 3 permanent members: Japan, India, and US. But the foundation has been laid. Australia will definitely become a much larger participant in the naval exercises and the upcoming military drills that these 4 countries will conduct together. So the quadrilateral dialogue took place in Manila on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit. Now, what happened after the dialogue? Did the countries come together and they presented a declaration in front of the rest of the world? No, they did not. As I told you, since this group is being revived again, so they are taking small steps. All the countries involved, India, Australia, US, Japan, rather than issuing a joint statement, they issued separate statements, but the crux of their respective statements was the same. They said that they listed the Indo-Pacific as a major area of the deliberations and resolved to expand cooperation to uphold a rules-based order and respect for the international law in the strategically important region. Now, as you know, China claims the entire South China Sea. Rather, you know what? Let's have a look at the map and then discuss what they are basically talking about when these respective countries talk about international law and respect of the rules-based order. Now, have a look at this map. This is China, this is Philippines, this is the capital of Philippines, Manila, where the 31st ASEAN summit was held, and This, as you can see, is the largest island in Asia. I want you guys to write in the comment box below what is the name of this island. It is the largest island in Asia. Now, this is the South China Sea, as you can see, and for a very long time there were a lot of disputes within the South China Sea between the ASEAN countries. For example, the Paracel Islands that is claimed by Vietnam, China, Taiwan, and then the Scarborough Shoal that is claimed by China, Taiwan, and Philippines. Then the Spratly Islands that is claimed by China, Vietnam, Taiwan, Malaysia, Philippines, and Brunei, all these countries. So China has actually amplified the dispute by a lot of volumes by claiming this entire South China Sea. China refers to this area as the area between the 9 dash. Alright, so this is the 9 dash, and this dash, all these 9 dashes, they mark the limit of the Chinese claims. Now, China isn't exactly opposed to any cargo passing through the South China Sea that China claims. China is pretty much alright with Taiwan trading with India, or perhaps Vietnam sending some cargo to Philippines. China has not really objected to that yet. But once China claims authority of this entire region and the rest of the world agrees that yes, this indeed is China's sea, this entire region belongs to China, China has the authority to blockade any of the trade routes of this region. That gives China enormous power. Alright, so the quadrilateral dialogue countries, the 4 countries, they do not want China to have this bargaining chip that easily. Moreover, the International Tribunal in The Hague has also ruled against China's claim of this 9 dash line theory. They said that no, South China Sea belongs to every country, they can navigate easily, and this is something that the 4 countries, the quadrilateral group, stands for. They stands for free navigation in the South China Sea. They do not think one country should have the keys to this entire region, and they can use it as a geopolitical tool later on. So we do not know how China will use the South China Sea as a geopolitical tool, as a geostrategic tool later on, because for the time being China's intentions certainly don't seem peaceful, because as you know, there are a lot of disputed islands in the South China Sea, but China is also building artificial islands near the Paracel Islands. So these artificial islands are not really being built for some vacation homes. China has actually deployed anti-aircraft missiles and other military hardware in these artificial islands. Now, why would China do such a thing? Obviously, that raises concerns in the mind of a lot of countries. Now, what the thing that makes it harder for the quadrilateral group to engage with China with regards to the South China Sea is that a lot of countries within the ASEAN region that have direct stakes in the South China Sea are not opposed to China's claims in the South China Sea. For example, in Philippines, when the 31st ASEAN summit was being held, Filipino president, he rejected the idea of making any statement on the South China Sea during the ASEAN summit. He also said that he would not like other countries to make statements about the South China Sea, and this was a huge victory, a huge diplomatic victory for China yet again, because throughout the ASEAN summit, no country said a single word about South China Sea, about the navigation. Sure, there were some vague references, but no one specifically mentioned the South China Sea. So in a way, since Philippines and also to some extent Malaysia and Brunei are not all that excited to resist Chinese pressure in the South China Sea, the quadrilateral group becomes much more important in order to maintain freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, because since these smaller countries have pretty much bowed down to the Chinese pressure, it is up to the big 4 countries like Australia, India, Japan, and US to make sure that the South China Sea does not become the People's Republic of China's backyard. Now, another huge question is, will the Quad work? They have a huge task in front of them. They are up against the economic might of China that is poised to become the largest economy in the world in a few decades. Well, if you look in history, it's not important that only democracies work together. Just have a look at World War II, when a democracy like US, they allied with an empire, the United Kingdom, that had countries like India under it, and they exploited countries like India to take advantage of them and better their own economies. And then these two countries, they teamed up with Soviet Union, a communist country, and all of them fought against the Nazis and the Japanese militaries. So it is not important that you need to have similar political systems in order to form a grouping. And it is also not important that since two countries are democracies, that they will also work together. We can take the prime example of India and US, that were on the opposite sides in the Cold War, and they had very strained relations throughout the Cold War. And since even though both of them were democracies, US at one point even decided to attack India in order to save Pakistan in the 1971 war. So the idea that all the four countries are democracies, that's why they will work together, it's a very flawed concept. All the countries need common interests in order to work together as a group. Now, secondly, should America's interest in the region be taken seriously? Because initially, when Barack Obama announced the pivot to Asia, the rationale behind shifting 60% of America's naval assets in the Asia Pacific region was that the Trans Pacific Partnership was going to be approved, and because of that, a lot of US cargo would probably sail through the Indo Pacific region, and of course the Asian routes as well. So that's why, in order to protect its cargo, US thought it would be nice to just shift 60% of its naval assets in that region. But now, since Donald Trump has pretty much destroyed the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or at least USA is out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, will US still rebalance 60% of its naval assets in the region? Will US still do that? That remains a huge question, because US doesn't really have a huge reason to stay invested in this region, because the Trans-Pacific Partnership is no longer there. And about saving the developing Asian countries from a debt trap, well, when India is going to be part of such a quadrilateral group where they will try to save all these countries from debt, then India should probably look at Bhutan as well, that is in a debt trap because of India. Well, Bhutan for a very long time worked on hydroelectric projects with the help of Indian funding, and things were going pretty smooth when both the countries were going one project at a time. But a couple of years ago, India and Bhutan decided that they will start working on multiple hydroelectricity projects, and Bhutan decided to take a lot of funding from India. And now, since all those projects are near completion, they don't really seem that profitable to Bhutan. The Bhutanese government doesn't really think that they will be able to repay the interest to India, also the rest of the capital. So Bhutan is also under a lot of debt, and because of that, there is a lot of resentment in Bhutan towards India, because they believe that India is doing similar things to Bhutan that China has done to Sri Lanka. So India needs to reconsider its lending strategy as well, because it simply is not easy to lend to smaller countries. There will always remain the problem of a debt trap, of those countries falling in a debt trap. And finally, India, it really should focus on building stronger ties with its neighboring countries like Myanmar. Vietnam can be a great option for India if India wants to stand up to China's assertiveness. Vietnam has always had strained relations with China, and although India has taken steps to forge stronger defense relations with Vietnam, I think a lot needs to be done. So rather than forming a quadrilateral grouping with the three countries that don't really have huge interest in maintaining the free navigation in the South China Sea, India should probably focus more on forging good relations with the neighboring countries. That is a much more feasible idea, and perhaps it can yield better result for India as well. So this is the end of our video. I hope you guys like it. Do make sure to like this video. It encourages us and it also motivates us to keep making quality videos for you guys. And also share this video on Facebook or WhatsApp if you can. Thank you for watching. God bless you all.